I am a crime journalist. My archives contain cases of exceptional importance, most of which are classified. You won't read about them in newspapers or magazines, nor about those who uncovered the horrifying deeds of criminals. Today, I will tell you about one of these mysterious and exceptionally unusual cases. When we think of the phrase serial killer, names like Ted Bundy usually come to mind. Criminals who are hard to perceive as human after learning what they've done. However, history has even darker examples, cases where ruthless killers turned out to be children. One such story is that of Mary Bell, an 11-year-old British girl who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1968. This little girl, the one you see in the picture, was convicted in December 1968 after confessing to multiple murders. She was only 10 years old when she committed her first crime. How could a child with an angelic face become a killer? In May 1957, a 16-year-old prostitute named Betty Bell gave birth to a baby girl. For reasons unknown, despite lacking any maternal instincts, Betty did not give up her child. Mary would have lived a far better life in an orphanage than in her own home. Mary and her mother Betty lived on White House Road in a poor, economically struggling area of Newcastle until the 1960s. Many neighborhoods in Newcastle, including Scotswood itself, were filled with 19th-century brick two-story cottages built for the working class. By the 1960s, these cottages were being demolished to make way for modern housing. The children in the area often played in abandoned houses awaiting demolition or on the wastelands left behind. Mary never missed her mother, as she only felt safe when Betty was absent. Betty had been mentally unstable since childhood. For example, for many years, she refused to eat with the family unless her food was placed in a corner under a chair. Betty worked as a prostitute and was often absent from home, traveling to Glasgow for work. In addition to Mary, she had 3 other children. Mary was unwanted. Before her birth, Betty had tried to poison herself with pills in an apparent suicide attempt. Mary's aunt testified in court that, in her early childhood, Mary frequently suffered injuries during domestic accidents when left alone with her mother. This led relatives to suspect that Betty was trying to kill her daughter while making the death appear accidental. Once, around 1960, Betty threw Mary out of a first-floor window. An independent witness stated that they had seen Betty give Mary sleeping pills disguised as candy. On another occasion, when Mary was an infant, Betty sold her to a mentally unstable woman who couldn't have children. Another of Betty's sisters, Catherine, searched Newcastle to find Mary and eventually brought her back home. For reasons unknown, Betty always refused her relatives' offers to take Mary into their care. During police interrogations, Mary revealed that she had been subjected to sexual abuse, stating that Betty forced her to participate in sexual acts with men from the age of 4. There is another theory that Betty, suffering from Munchausen syndrome, fabricated illnesses for Mary to draw attention to herself. What is certain is that Mary first encountered death at the age of 5 when she witnessed a friend's death. Considering later events in Mary Bell's life, it can be suggested that death didn't frighten her but instead fascinated her. Mary was outwardly very sweet, but neighbors and school teachers noted strange behavior long before she became a murderer. As the daughter of a prostitute, she was withdrawn, aggressive, and seemed emotionally simple. But these alone are not necessarily signs of a mental disorder. Mary attended Laval Road School, where she exhibited disturbing behavior both at home and in the classroom. She attacked other children, both boys and girls, often trying to strangle them. She committed acts of vandalism and displayed troubling signs, such as sudden mood swings and chronic bedwetting at night. A classmate of Mary's later testified that they had all become so used to her unpredictable behavior that they could tell from her movements when she was about to attack someone. Because of this, Other children were reluctant to play with her. Mary's only friend was a 13-year-old neighbor, Norma Joyce Bell. Despite sharing a last name, the two girls were not related. On May 11, 1968, an incident occurred involving a boy who lived near the Bells. A 3-year-old fell from the roof of a one-story structure and miraculously survived. At the time, no one suspected that Mary was involved, even though she was nearby when it happened. 3 days later, 3 women went to the police to report a strange girl. They claimed that Mary was aggressive and had tried to strangle their daughters. However, the police officer dismissed their complaints. On May 25th, the day before her birthday, Mary strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in an abandoned house. The murder was witnessed by Norma Bell, who became, in some sense, an accomplice. However, it is believed that Norma did not actively participate in the crime, or may not have even been present. A local worker named John Hall discovered Martin's body and tried to revive him, but failed. Mary, displaying shocking boldness, approached Martin's aunt and told her that she knew where Martin was and that he was covered in blood from an accident. Tragically, Martin's aunt followed Mary to the crime scene, guided by the very child who had killed her nephew. In the days following the murder, Mary and Norma tormented the grieving family by asking questions such as, "How sad is the family?" and "Does his mother miss him?" Eventually, Martin's aunt stopped answering the door to them. Mary and Norma concocted a story, claiming that Martin had been beaten by older boys. This explanation confused the police, as Martin's body showed no signs of violence. A bottle of sleeping pills was found near his body, leading authorities to conclude that the boy had died by accident after consuming the pills. Soon after, another strange incident occurred that should have raised suspicions. On the day of Martin's funeral, Mary visited his home. When Martin's grieving mother answered the door, Mary stated that she wanted to see the body. Shocked, the woman slammed the door in Mary's face. Overwhelmed with grief, she later forgot about the strange visitor. However, the mother would recall Mary's bizarre behavior 2 months later, after another horrifying crime. It is worth noting that Mary and Norma did not make much effort to hide their involvement in Martin's death. At one point, they even told neighborhood children that they were responsible for his death. This information reached the adults, but they dismissed the girls' claims as the product of unhealthy imaginations. In class, Mary drew a picture of a boy lying in the exact position that Martin's body had been found. Although she was not the only child aware of how Martin had died, Mary was the only one to illustrate the scene in such detail. Despite this, her teacher didn't suspect her, assuming that the children had heard about the incident and that the drawing was harmless. Mary continued to attack other children and boast about her actions. On one occasion, she pointed to the house where Martin's body was found and told neighborhood kids that it was the place where she had killed someone. The other children laughed, assuming she was joking. On May 26, 1968, her 11th birthday, Mary's behavior became increasingly erratic. She attacked Norma's younger sister so violently that Norma's father had to throw her out of the house. Mary seemed to lose control after Martin's funeral. Desperate for attention, she turned on her best friend, Norma, by striking her and kicking her in the head. Afterward, Mary announced that she was ready to kill again. Witnesses to the incident ignored her threats, as Mary had a reputation for being overly dramatic. In a photograph taken during a local protest against abandoned buildings, which residents wanted demolished to prevent further accidents, Mary can be seen holding a sign. This act of inserting herself into the situation suggests narcissistic tendencies. Experts believe that some killers behave this way to feed their egos, keep attention on their crimes, and prolong the public fascination with the murders. While no official investigation had begun, the doctor who examined Martin's body told police that it appeared he had been strangled by a child. There were no signs of external violence, but the manner of death strongly pointed to strangulation. Despite this, law enforcement treated Martin's death as an accident. On July 31st, 1968, Mary Bell committed her second murder. This time, the victim was 3-year-old Brian Howe. He was strangled in a wasteland not far from where Mary and Norma lived. After the murder, Mary returned to the scene to mutilate the body. She used scissors to cut the boy's hair and clothing and scratched the letter M onto his abdomen. This act of revisiting the crime scene to alter the body is considered a classic behavior among killers, seeking to assert control or leave a mark on their crimes. Brian's disappearance caused immediate concern among his family and neighbors. A search party was organized, and his body was discovered later that same evening. Unlike Martin Brown's case, Brian's death was quickly classified as suspicious due to the visible mutilations. An autopsy confirmed that the boy had been strangled with deliberate force and that the injuries on his body were inflicted after his death. The investigation began to narrow its focus on the local children, particularly Mary and Norma, who had been seen playing with Brian shortly before his death. The girls were brought in for questioning. While Norma appeared visibly distressed and denied any involvement, Mary displayed a chilling calmness. She not only denied her involvement, but also tried to deflect suspicion by suggesting that an older boy in the neighborhood might have killed Brian. Her behavior during the interrogation raised red flags among investigators. The police began to piece together the patterns of Mary's behavior and her connection to both murders. Witnesses came forward, reporting Mary's aggressive tendencies and her frequent boasts about hurting other children. Additionally, Mary's inconsistent statements and her attempts to implicate others only deepened suspicions. One significant breakthrough came when Mary was found to have written a series of notes in a notebook that appeared to confess to the killings. The notes contained graphic descriptions of the murders and reflected a disturbing lack of remorse. Combined with witness testimonies and her own behavior, this evidence became crucial in building a case against her. On August 7, 1968, both Mary Bell and Norma Bell were formally charged with the murders of Martin Brown and Brian Howe. While Norma was ultimately acquitted, as her involvement was deemed passive and influenced by Mary's dominance, Mary was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The court determined that she exhibited psychopathic traits, but was too young to fully comprehend the nature of her actions. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Mary's case became a landmark in legal and psychological studies, raising questions about the responsibility and rehabilitation of child offenders. Over the years, her story has been revisited in various books, documentaries, and discussions about the justice system. Mary Bell was initially sent to a secure children's facility after her conviction. Given her young age, the authorities faced significant challenges in deciding where she should serve her sentence. She spent her early years in a specialized unit designed for young offenders but was later transferred to more traditional prison settings as she grew older. In 1980, after serving 12 years in custody, Mary was released on parole. To protect her from public backlash, she was granted anonymity and given a new identity. Despite these measures, media outlets and private investigators occasionally uncovered her whereabouts, sparking outrage and reigniting public debate about whether she deserved a second chance at life outside prison. Mary Bell went on to have a child of her own, and her anonymity was extended to include her daughter. This decision, made by the courts, aimed to shield both Mary and her child from harassment and harm.